Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I hope that this week brings you some nuggets of hope and inspiration as we have a hard conversation today about something I think that is not talked about enough, which is a miscarriage. Today, my guest is a special guest. She's also a dear colleague and friend and has agreed to come on and share her story with us all today. I'd like to introduce Kristen Vicidomino. And Kristen is our senior project manager on our team. And I want to welcome you to the show today, Kristen. And thank you so much for being willing to talk about a topic that I do not think is talked about enough. And I think that there is so much misunderstanding in the grief process around people who lose a child in the womb. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So I think that we'll just open up with you telling us your story. And you are a mother of two. I forgot to mention that when I introduced you.
Yeah. So it really started, the process of even trying to conceive in the first place was probably 6 years, I guess, ago at this 6 years, almost to the day, actually, now that I'm thinking about it at this point. Since then, I have had two healthy children. And, at the time, I didn't really know what to expect. We had decided, we were ready to start trying to have a baby. And so we did. And honestly, to my surprise, it happened really quickly. I got pregnant very quickly, probably within the first 2 or 3 months, which was really exciting. And at that point, it never crossed my mind to not be anything but excited. I wasn't really worried. I wasn't concerned. And as a person who has a lot of anxiety, it's shocking to me looking back that I didn't have any of those feelings. And I think part of that is just, to your point, no one really talks about the reality of what happens a lot. Since then, I've learned that this happens 1 in 4 pregnancies. It's not something that it happens really, really frequently. So we actually, my husband, Matt, and I, we were on vacation. We were in California when I found out I was pregnant. We were at the Grand Canyon, because I remember we got the positive pregnancy test on a Wednesday night when we were in a hotel room at the Grand Canyon. And the next day, I was standing looking at one of the most beautiful things in the world, right? And just thinking about it and excited about it. So we continued our vacation. We kept going. We went then to California. Didn't really think much of it. Was excited, obviously. We talked about it a lot. And I don't really know what possessed me to take another test. It was a 2 or 3 week vacation. So it had been a couple of weeks at that point. And I had another pregnancy test. And I don't really know what possessed me to take it, but I did. And the line, the positive line, was still there, but it was faint, which was strange. We went out. I took another one. I remember I was in a McDonald's bathroom in Malibu waiting for the pregnancy test to come back. Because at this point I was concerned. I was worried. It was odd to me that a couple of weeks had gone by and it wasn't darker. It was lighter, the line. And so I took another one and it was negative. And this was a 24 hours after I had taken the first one, because we were out of our element. We had to go to find a CVS. So this is all consuming now while we're trying to enjoy our vacation. So it was a couple of weeks later. I did a lot of Googling and self trying to figure out what was going on. I didn't have any of my doctors around. And a couple of days later, we were at LAX actually, and I started to bleed. It was a Sunday. We were in the airport. I didn't had no one, right? I'm trying to navigate my way through security at the biggest, most chaotic airport in the country. And I knew that it was bad. I obviously had read, oh, well, maybe it's not awful. Maybe it doesn't mean the end. Some people bleed in the first trimester. So I didn't really have any answers. And I had to get on this 5-hour flight and not have any idea what was going on. I remember getting picked up from the airport and we just cried the whole way home. And from there, I ended up in the next couple of days going to the doctor. They took my blood levels and, did some ultrasounds, realized that the baby had not really ever been alive. I don't think it was a chemical pregnancy. It was definitely a clear on the ultrasound. That's not what it was, but it was probably 7 weeks when it happened. And, I went to work the next day. I had just been on vacation for 3 weeks. I felt like I couldn't take the day off of work. So I was this was happening while I was trying to keep it together at work the next morning. And I just think since all of that happened, it was hard. It was hard in a lot of ways. It was hard then again, the wait trying to get pregnant again. It was really hard when I did get pregnant again. It was a long 10 months of pregnancy for me. I didn't feel like I had anyone in my life who had been through something like this. I didn't feel like I really had anyone to talk to who could understand what had happened. I got a lot of like comments that were not misplaced, because that's not fair. People do try to help and do try to say what they think is going to make you feel better. But comments like, oh, well, at least it was early on, like weren't helpful for me, like at all. And I just, at that point, and part of the reason why I'm here today is because I realized like this does happen so often and there's like stigma around it and no one talks about it. Then I started talking about it. And as I started talking about it, all these people were like, oh yeah, that happened to me. And I'm like, why doesn't anyone share these things? Like, it happens so often and it happens all the time. And it leads to so many other concerns or worries or issues, and nobody's talking about it. And I just never really understood that. So I'm kind of an open book about it for that exact reason. Like since then, I've had a lot of friends who have come to me when similar things have happened and leaned on me because they know I know and I get it, because people just feel like they don't have anyone to talk to.
I know I'm finding myself that I was holding my breath through most of that story, because I can think of lots of different things that people would say out of sheer ignorance. Like, I mean, it was 7 weeks, give me a break. Like, was that even a real kid? You don't know your child. Like, I can think of all of the things that I'm sure that go through people's heads, even if they don't verbalize it. And then of course you do have those people that verbalize it, and not because they're trying to be cruel or insensitive, but really it comes from a place of pure, just ignorance. Like, I mean, I'm so sorry that you lost the baby, but really ... So I really want to take a few steps back. So here you are on vacation. You take a pregnancy test. Why? Had you missed a cycle? Did you feel pregnant? Like, what even prompted you to take the test to begin with? Let's start there.
Yeah. So I had gotten off of birth control. We knew we were like actively trying, and it was just time, if that makes sense. Like it was the day that I should have gotten my period. I didn't get my period. So
got it.
Yeah.
So you take the test, you find out that and just the joy that comes when you're trying to get pregnant. And of course, like you said, it was easy for you. For some women, it is anything but, and they have to go through in vitro and all of these things to try to get pregnant. You get pregnant, and that feeling of joy, right? That you guys now have this like intimate secret, this baby is growing inside of you. And that just, it's all consuming, right? I mean, it's like you're thinking about it.
I'm like standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I will never forget this. And my husband is getting like far too close to the edge for my comfort level. And I had this immense sense of like, I have something to protect other than me. It was such like a strange time to be at the Grand Canyon and be like, don't get too close. Matt, like you're going to be a father. You need to come back. Like, it was just such an overwhelming sense of like, that was exactly it. Like, I have to be really careful. There's something to protect other than just myself now. And your whole like outlook changes. Yeah.
And that one, look, I'm going to cry in that one split second. So now you're on vacation and you've got this incredible secret, right? Because I know a lot of women don't like to share the secret for this exact reason, that, in a very vulnerable time in the pregnancy and so many different things can happen, and that you don't bring the baby to term. And now you've told the whole world, and now you've got to go tell, and now you've got to go, can't untell people, right? Now you've got to share this horrific news. Did you tell anybody the secret, or was it just you and Matt?
I probably would have had we not been away, but because we were away, I wasn't talking to like my mom, for example. I wasn't talking to her as regularly. We were just on vacation, trying to enjoy ourselves. We actually, towards the end of vacation, when it like the anxiety and concern really ramped up, we were in Malibu because we were driving to a friend's house. So we were actually staying with friends of ours those last couple of days when we were going through all this. And we ended up telling them months later. But at the time, that was another thing. Like, we were in someone else's home trying to deal with this together and figure out what was going on while we were like with friends trying to pretend to have fun and pretend like not to be nervous wrecks. So no, my mom, when I ended up calling her, was after everything had happened and telling her what had happened.
So now here you are, you're on vacation. You said, oh, I don't know why I took another test. And I would say that is a mom's intuition that there was something prodding you to take another test, and you did. And you see a faint line, and now you're worried, right? Because you know that,
It just didn't seem right. It didn't seem right that at this point in the pregnancy, the line would be getting like more
fainter.
faint. And then you start Googling. It's like, well, a positive test is a positive test. But I just felt like that's not, like, I know enough about science and medicine to know that's not really the way these tests work. And at that point, that shouldn't have been happening.
And then the game in the head starts, right? You talk yourself in and out of the worst case scenario and then bat those thoughts away. And you're still trying to be on this vacation that you now can't really enjoy because I'm sure these thoughts are consuming you. And now you're taking another test and now it's negative.
Yeah. Yeah. So incessant Googling, incessant, like trying to play doctor.
And what's Matt doing?
Or helpful. He tends to be one to say, like, let's not jump to conclusions until we actually get an answer. That's not how I am. I jump to every conclusion and I jump back and forth between conclusions every like 5 minutes, depending on what I read on the internet. I think he was very much like, just take a deep breath. Let's enjoy our vacation. Like, we have another couple days, because we were kind of towards the end of it at this point, a long time, like I said, like 2 solid weeks had passed, 2.5 weeks had passed since the beginning of the test. And now this happening. And so he was like, let's not jump to anything. We'll get home tomorrow. We'll figure it out. We'll call the doctor. We'll figure it out. That's just not how I am.
But now you're in an airport and now you're bleeding. You're going through this really deeply intimate, horrific event, and you're in an airport.
I had my sunglasses on, my hat on. Like, I remember coming out of the bathroom and him just standing there, and I'm just like sobbing. And again, though, then, we're sitting there and the Googling starts again. Like, okay, I'm bleeding now. Like, what does this mean? Well, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Some people say that this happens. Like, it was so much uncertainty and so much stress around that uncertainty. I don't deal really well with uncertainty. I think part of it was a good intro into like the uncertainty of motherhood. Like, there's so many things now that I can't control. And that was part of it. I had, up until that point, I felt like I like to be in control. Like, I have a shirt that says, I'm not a control freak, but you're doing it wrong. Like, I like to be in control. And this was just something that was so outside my realm of anything that I could control. And it was a new feeling for me in a lot of ways. Yeah, it was awful. It was awful.
Did you somewhere and that you had miscarried?
And I think that was a couple days leading up to it, even like all the Googling, like I knew it wasn't good. You try to like look on the bright side and you try to take the positive stories and say, okay, like maybe this is what's happening to me. I kind of knew that wasn't the case. The other thing that I hadn't mentioned is the first week or two, I didn't feel great. Like, you had your normal not feel. And then you look back and I realized like I was kind of consumed by stress and worry, but I also was like feeling better physically. And I think that was another sign probably that things weren't going the way that they were supposed to be going. As awful as those feelings can be in early pregnancy, they're reassuring in a lot of ways, because at least, like your body's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And a lot of that had gone away. So yeah, I think I knew in my gut that it wasn't going the way it was supposed to be going.
So let's talk about when you find out for certain that you were pregnant. You lost the baby. You're left with these unbelievable, complex emotions, I'm sure. You hadn't shared it with anybody, your mom, your best friend. And now this has happened to you. And you need to be able to talk about it. What happened next? Who did you talk to first? Well, first of all, you and your husband had to deal with it, right? And I have heard from a lot of men, when their wives are pregnant, it doesn't really become real until the baby is born. How did the two of you handle this miscarriage?
I'm sad to say that I don't really even know how he handled it, because I was so consumed with my own feelings. And looking back, I think that he was also going through his own set of things. And I think part of it was worry about me, honestly. And, we can get into this, but I definitely fell into a very dark place afterwards. And I think that he was it was a lot of worry. He was very worried about me. I don't know if the pregnancy was as real to him. Again, like, I don't know if it had necessarily like hit him in the same way that it hit me. I do think though, like, he saw what it did to me. And I think a lot of his feelings around it were worry and concern about what I was going through and how I was doing.
So let's go there now. Let's talk about what women don't talk about, what we don't talk about as a culture. I know that I have dear friends that have had a miscarriage, very close friends, and what that felt like. But talking about this is really is really enlightening for me as well, because I think that many of us, because we don't know the baby, right? It's hard enough for us to deal with grief when somebody loses someone they love and nobody knows what the hell to say, right? I mean, we are always at a loss. But then it's really becomes pretty intangible when there is this being that is growing inside of somebody and nobody's met this being. And so I think that we are all guilty of maybe, I think, not really understanding the gravity of this experience for people who go through it. So I would be so honored if you could talk to us and put language to when you said that you went into a dark place. What was happening for you?
I'm not a glass half full kind of person, just in life. I'm more like glass half empty. And so for me, it was, I have a history of anxiety already. You add this on top of it. I had never dealt with anything like this before. It was always assuming, from that point forward, it was always assuming the worst. And it like started with the spiraling, I'm not going to be able to get pregnant again. What if this keeps happening? What if it happens again? Maybe it's not a huge deal, but then what if it happens a third time? And then I have to go, maybe what if I can't get pregnant? What if we have to, and it just sort of like unraveled. It also was a time in my life where a lot of my friends were sharing their news of being pregnant and having babies. In particular, one of my best friends was, I'm trying to think of the timeline, probably got pregnant like a month before or a month after me, I guess. And so she had to tell me that. I know she was very nervous to tell me that. I don't think I handled that very well. I feel terrible, like looking back. She had a gender reveal and I didn't go. I couldn't go. I couldn't bring myself to go. It was just too hard for me. There were days that, couldn't get out of bed. I remember Matt like calling my mom, and again, like to the worry that he was feeling, like just couldn't get out of bed, couldn't bring myself to pull myself up out of this like spiraling of the what ifs. And then I probably 5 months later, I did end up getting pregnant again. And I spent 10 months of pregnancy, like always waiting for the worst to happen. And I think that was even harder for me in a lot of ways than the miscarriage itself. And that's kind of why I preface this with saying, like, when the miscarriage happened, I didn't really think of like the worst happening. It was just excitement. It was pure excitement and joy. And I never even like was excited about being pregnant the next time. It was just so full of worry. I didn't tell my best friends, and it was my son, he's turning 5 in a couple of weeks. I didn't tell my best friends I was pregnant with him until I was like 14 weeks. And they couldn't understand why I waited so long. And it was like, because I'm not happy about this. Like I am, but I'm not. Like, I'm so nervous. I almost can't be excited. I can't be happy because I am just assuming that something awful is going to happen. And that was a long 10 months. Like around 19 or 20 weeks pregnant with him, we had a trip planned to Ireland, and, it was a little bit of like post-traumatic stress, I think, honestly, like having been on a plane and going through what I went through, I was like, I'm not getting back on a plane. Like, you can't pay me to get back on a plane. And I remember like sitting in the bathroom in tears. I had bought travel insurance and my doctor was like, I can get you out of this trip and I can get you your money back if you want, but I really think you should go. And, Matt and my mom, like me sitting in tears on the way to the airport being like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And we did, but I just think like there was never an enjoyable moment in my pregnancy after, because it was so wrought with concern and worry.
What's striking me about this is that, grief is the thief of joy, right? I mean, grief really steals our joy for some of us for long periods of time. Everybody's grief journey is just so different. And I'm thinking about like you waiting, and a lot of people, it's a very common theme with when we lose people, especially when they're, I call them untimely deaths. I mean, it's a silly thing to say because really, there really is no untimely death. I mean, we know that people die at all ages all the time, but I think that in our little bubble of our ideal world, we're like everybody grows to old age and everyone dies in chronological order. And of course, that's just simply not true. We just hope it's true for us, right? We always hope in our life that's the way it's going to go. No one's going to, kids aren't going to die before their parents, etc. But the way that you are describing those feelings of other shoe dropping, that is such a common theme when we lose somebody to an untimely death, to some sort of tragic death. I mean, after my brother died, I was so terrified of losing another sibling or anybody that I didn't want anybody to do anything. I didn't want them to travel. And my youngest brother was, taking this hiking trip and flying. And I was so consumed with worry all the time. And that's when I think about that grief steals joy, is because even it's not just your own joy. It's that when you talk about control, it's wanting to control everything around you too. Like, how do I protect every single person that I love so that nothing happens to anyone? But when you're talking about that, here you've got this baby that is growing inside of you and is healthy, and how you can't enjoy one single moment because you are so terrified that something horrific is going to happen. That is the hallmark of grief, I think. And so even going on the trip, I can imagine being on the trip, that how do you enjoy this trip to Ireland when you're so afraid that something's going to happen to the baby inside of you? And I don't know if this is true. I'm just imagining, like, even around the flight, is it okay for me to fly during this point in my pregnancy, right? Because I know there's a whole bunch of, information around when women should fly and when you shouldn't fly. And was that also going on for you too?
Yeah, so it was partially that. And I remember I chose my OBGYN the second time around because she was such a straight shooter with me. And I needed that. Like, I needed someone to bring me back to earth and deal with my anxiety and tell me how it was. And I remember being on the phone with her like a day or two before I was supposed to leave, when she said to me, I can write you a note and I can get you your money back for this trip if you want, but I do think you should go. And what she said, she was like, you are 19 weeks pregnant. She's like, I'm going to tell you right now, even if something happened here, the worst would happen. She was like, if your water broke and you were here versus your water broke and you were there, it's going to be the same outcome and it's going to be awful. So why not just go? And, it's awful to think in those terms, but I needed someone to be straight with me and say exactly that. The health, you're going to Ireland, the healthcare there is great. And if the worst happens, the worst is going to happen here or there. So just go and enjoy yourself. For me, it was the control piece. I fixated on things that I felt like I could control. So for me, didn't say it in my bio, but I am a dietitian. And so I know a lot about food and food safety and what you should and shouldn't be eating, even though the data even now doesn't really support a lot of that stuff. That is what I fixated on. I was terrified of getting listeria. I microwaved my food till it was scalding hot to kill any potential bacteria, but it was obsessive. And it was definitely I have some OCD tendencies for sure. They were kicking in very hard, obsessing over this. I went out to eat and there was parsley sprinkled on top of my meatballs, and obsessing that I ate the raw part. What if they were sprouts and what did they look like? And then Googling what they looked like and trying to figure out what the food at the restaurant was. And, worrying that I ate something I wasn't supposed to. It came out really strongly in the food for me. And so we actually got to Ireland, and one of the first meals I was served there was, and this is not even me exaggerating, literally raw chicken. This nice restaurant served me a piece of chicken and I cut into it and it was raw. And I was like, oh my God, this trip is going to be awful. How do I handle it? The next 8-9 days there, I basically ate soup. I ate soup and bread because I was like, well, soup, it was boiling at one point and it killed whatever could have been in there. And I ate soup for a week.
And, we're laughing and smiling, but I can feel my own anxiety as you're talking, because you said that you had, that you've had anxiety in the past, and this just sort of shot it through the sky, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that felt like for you dealing with your own neuroses and your anxiety and all of these things. How is this playing out and impacting your relationships? A, with your husband, were you keeping all of this inside? Were you sharing it?
Oh no, I was definitely sharing it. He, at this point, knew me well enough to know that I had these tendencies. I don't think any of us expected them to be so strong at this point. I think he really hoped that they would go away once I had the baby. With some therapy, I got help with them. They definitely still bled over a little bit into like some postpartum anxiety for sure. I think sometimes the people closest to me like don't know how to, when I call them my spirals, right? Because that's what it is. It gets out of control. I like incessantly look things up. I incessantly think about them. I can't let it go until finally I can. And sometimes it takes 4 hours. Sometimes it takes 3 days. Sometimes it took another doctor's appointment for the doctor to say to me, things look great. We just had an ultrasound. Everything's fine. So it was so dependent on like what was happening next a lot of times when I would drop it. He definitely got to the point in a lot of cases where he was just like, I can't listen to you talk about this anymore. Like for my own well-being, like I cannot listen to you talk about like, there's so many examples. Like I microwaved something on a styrofoam plate one day and it like got a little bit of my food and then I ate the food and I remember calling the nurse and being like, in so much fret because I ate some like part of styrofoam and that went on for a couple of days and him just being like, you have to like learn to let some of this go. He actually came to a couple therapy sessions with me where she did a great job of explaining to him like what was happening with me and why and how he could better like cope and deal with it. Because, people, and my mom does the same thing, honestly, like people saying to me, like, don't worry about it. That's not helpful. That doesn't help.
What was helpful, Kristen? What was helpful?
I don't think feeding into it is particularly helpful either. One of the biggest tips, at least for myself, was allowing myself to feel that, but setting a time limit for it. So like we did a lot of like, you get 30 minutes a day or whatever it is to incessantly panic about whatever it is you are dealing with that day. But you set a timer. And when that timer goes off, you like put it to the side and you try your best to move on because hours would go by. It'd be like the middle of the night and I would still be like in this moment. And so that was very helpful for me. And just saying to Matt in particular, like, these are my 30 minutes. Let me talk about it. Let me Google it. Let me do whatever I want to do about it. And then we can move on. And I think that was helpful for him too, because he knew there was going to be an end to it. And that
and was there an end to it, or did you pretend? Like, were you really able to put it aside after 30 minutes?
Sometimes I pretended, but even pretending meant that I wasn't talking about it, even though my mind was still going. And I also I remember for my birthday, we went to see a movie and I'm usually not a big fan of like movies and movie theaters, but it was such a lovely 2 hours for my brain not to do anything else. And so after that happened, it was kind of early in the pregnancy. I was only a couple months pregnant. I kind of channeled that and was like, okay, there are things that we can do that at least gives my brain a break. And that was one of them. There were, exercise was really helpful for me in a lot of ways. So there were things that I knew I could lean back on and at least have my brain shut down a little bit for a couple hours. And it was a good break. It was a little bit of respite.
I want to go into what this looked like in the circle of your friendships, because you said some really profound, important things that I want to get to. And one being, that it was very difficult to feel joy for other people after this miscarriage who are having babies. So we'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk about tips that help, because we recently I had a guest on, Ann Moss, who lost her son by suicide, and she would give herself 5 minutes a day to torture herself. And that's what, the guilt and all the stuff that we do, right? And she, set a limit of 5 minutes. She did not have, a lot of anxiety prior to that, though, because I think that's such an important piece. But, I think, so I love that you're putting a time limit on, but also those breaks, those real breaks where you give your mind a rest, whether it's a movie, you talked about exercise. It's like finding those things. And this is true for all grieving people, to find those things that can actually work for you. Because one thing doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but it's the break. It's the vacation from the worry or the thoughts spinning and spinning. And so you reminded me of something that I have used, and I've definitely used this in therapy with families. It's called the God bag. And you don't need to believe in God necessarily. It can be a higher being. It can be the universe, whatever it is, where you literally have something physical, a bag, a glass jar, whatever it is, and you write your concerns down and you physically put them in the jar, because what you're doing is you're taking it out of your brain and you're giving it up to
Whomever,
whatever it is, right? And it's another break. And maybe that break only lasts 10 minutes, but it's respite. It's respite from the worry, from the grief, from the guilt, from all the things that go on in our brain constantly when we're dealing with grief. So I wanted to ask you though, let's go to the friendships, because I know then we've got the guilt that people deal with, like you had said, and I don't know if you carry guilt still, but you said, that you're not proud of, can't remember exactly the words that you used, but you're not proud of, that maybe you couldn't support and be joyful around your friend who was having a gender release party. What was happening with your friendships? Were you talking to your women friends? Did you feel like you were being heard? I really would love for you to talk about that piece.
I mean, I think the guilt starts at the very beginning, honestly, and just around the word like miscarry, like the word miscarry itself carries a connotation that like I did something to cause this, right? And so that's really where it started. Like what did I do? Like, was it that glass of wine I had before I knew? Was it, did I go in a sauna? I mean, I didn't do these things, but pick anything, right? Pick anything. Was it the plane? I mean, and so I think the guilt like starts the very beginning of like what I could have done or done differently, maybe to not have this happen. And the truth really is that there's nothing that could have been, but in the moment, that's not how you're thinking. I was among the first of a lot of our friends to get pregnant. And I just didn't know anybody else who had similar circumstances. I think my friends tried hard I was pregnant with Patrick. I told you I didn't tell them until I was probably like 13, 14 weeks in that range. And they were shocked. They were utterly shocked that I waited that long. And it truly was because I felt like I was obviously nervous and no one could understand that like, while they tried, I remember the gender reveal friend, like we went out for a meal, and I remember her looking at me and being like, "Why aren't you excited?" And I'm like, I don't know if I can even explain to you like what's happening in my brain right now. And I felt so much guilt that I couldn't be there for her in that time, that she was excited and she was happy, and finding out that she was pregnant and then finding out that she was having a baby girl. Like there was just so much joy. And it was sad because she actually didn't, I don't know if I forget if she like didn't invite me to the gender reveal party. Like she knew enough not to make a big deal of it for me, which I think was helpful. And I think she was trying to protect me. It was hurtful that I felt like I was so on the outside, but at some level I knew I was doing that to myself. And that I think she had the best intentions and was like trying to be protective of my feelings and not like rub it in my face isn't right. But, she had something that she knew I didn't, and she knew I was in this dark place. And I felt terrible that when she told me she was pregnant, I cried. I literally cried the entire way home. I tried very hard. We were all together. There's 3 of us there. We've been friends since high school. They are still my nearest and dearest friends. And we were together in person, which doesn't happen very often for us, when she told me. And I called my mom. I think I called Matt first and just told him I was coming home and told him what happened. But I called my mom on the way home, and I remember crying, and I was like, "Mom, I don't think I handled that very well." Like I tried really hard to keep it together when the words came out of her mouth. But I think I am trying to see myself at like a distance now, and how I would have dealt. Like, I think I just shut down. And I think I'm sure the change in my demeanor was noticeable when she said it. I'm sure she felt that. I feel awful that she felt that. I feel awful that I couldn't have been like a better friend and be excited for her. Like this was her first child too. This was huge news for her, and she wanted to share it and be happy. And she knew, she said it in a way, she approached it in a way that she was very gentle about it. Like she knew what this was going to do to me. It was a very messy situation. And I think because of all that, I just didn't tell anyone. I truly didn't tell anyone. I had one friend at work who had some difficulty getting pregnant. I came into work that next day after I miscarried, and she was like the first person I told. She was really the only other person that I was like talking to about it and telling. And that hadn't happened to her specifically, but I just needed someone who was close to me, who I spent a lot of time with, to know, because I felt like I was sitting here at my desk trying to pretend like nothing was wrong. And I was like dying inside, honestly. And so I'm glad I had her. But other than that, like I just didn't really talk to anybody, but I didn't really feel like anyone could get it. And the other friend of like the three of us, she had a 1-year-old at the time, or he was a couple months, I guess. So like she had a healthy pregnancy. She already had a baby. So I just felt like they couldn't really understand. And they did try. It's just hard when you haven't been through it.
It's exactly how we all feel when we are going through deep grief, that if you've never experienced it, that's why we have grief groups, right? Because we feel like there is this expiration date of when you can continue to talk about your loved one. And I just imagine having a miscarriage that it's magnified by 10 because nobody knew the baby, right? I mean, it's such a personal, deep loss of so many different things. And it's so difficult for people to begin to understand what that loss actually feels like. And you're doing this, and I can't even tell you how you are. I used the word earlier, enlightening me, my girlfriend, when she lost her baby, and that I was there like a little bit when it first happened. But I think because it's so intangible for us on the outside, that we're just so ignorant to what is going on for this human being who has lost their baby. And so for you, not only did you, I mean, you feel like people didn't understand, but was there this other element to it where, God, I don't even know how to put language to it. I'm gonna put it out there and you tell me whether or not if I'm accurate. But were there these feelings inside of you of whether or not you even had the right to be grieving as deeply as you were?
Yes, absolutely. Like 100%. And I think that comes back to my comment about like, it was early, and I recognize that. And I felt bad maybe, or wrong to be having the emotions that I was having when externally, like whether explicitly or not, I felt like society was telling me like, pretend it didn't have, like I said, I was sitting at my desk the next day. I was actively bleeding, like sitting at my desk at work because I had just been on vacation. I felt like I couldn't take any more PTO. What do I do? So I went to work, and I like sat there and worked that day. And so I felt like everything around me was like reinforcing, move on, like pick your chin up, move on. And it was so hard. And I felt like everyone in my life, like kind of, again, no one was explicitly saying this to me, and I don't think they meant to do it on purpose, but was like reinforcing that feeling of like, you shouldn't be as upset as you are. It wasn't a big deal. Like you're being not too hard on you, but you're being very glass half empty, like with these like, oh, what if this happens again? What if it, like all of those feelings, I did feel like everyone was kind of like pushing that implicitly, perhaps. Again, no one was coming out and saying that because they all love me and they wouldn't say that. But I do feel like they a little bit felt that way because they had never been there. And so they didn't get it.
Did you get it, Kristen, though? Were you self-deprecating too? Like, were you doing any kind of self-talk, like you're being ridiculous or you're overreacting, or, God, it's this, it just compounds, right? And it's silent. It's like this silent howl because now you're not even, and now you're feeling guilt because you can't feel happy for somebody else who's pregnant. And it makes me, I feel so emotional listening to this because I'm like, who's taking care of Kristen during this? Like, who is loving you through this deep loss that you've experienced that now you feel like you can't even share it with anybody? Because you're being, quote unquote, I don't know if you're using this language with yourself, but neurotic is the only word that comes to mind.
But yeah, I mean, like it's too much, that it's an overreaction given the circumstances. And there were so many things around me. Again, nothing explicit, but just like cues from people and society and things that it was an overreaction. And I didn't feel like it was an overreaction, obviously. Yeah.
And so since all of this has happened and now you've got 2 beautiful children, what's happened as a result for you? How has it changed your perspective? You said now you talk about it openly and you talk to other women, and I mean, are there support groups out there? I mean, you must have Googled this after the loss of your baby. Did you find
all the Googling? Yeah.
Google's our BFF until
I
Google's
know.
not.
Dr. Google. At the time, I don't know. I don't know if this is exactly how I want to put it, but I'm not sure I wanted help. I think I was so deep in it. And I was like, to my point about people saying like, don't worry, you're worrying too much. My anxiety, like all of this, I always know when I am being like illogical, like when my anxious thoughts, like I know when they're not logical and I still can't, but I can't stop them still. And that's what I don't think people understand is, and in that moment, I truly didn't think I was being illogical. Like I don't know what I'm really trying to say. Like with my spiraling, there was an instance I remember when Patrick was really little, we had this tree and I was convinced that there was going to be a storm and the tree was going to fall down and like crush us all in our sleep. The next day I called the company, I paid $2,000 and we had the tree taken down. I kind of knew that that wasn't the most like logical reaction, but I took care of it in the way that I felt like I needed to take care of it to like give my anxiety a break. When I was in this, I didn't think I was being illogical. And I felt like everyone was telling me I was being illogical. And I didn't really want help because I was annoyed that everyone felt like I like shouldn't be like, again, like I was kind of hard on myself about it. I felt like I was getting external cues that I was being too hard, like that I was overreacting. So I didn't really want help. Looking back, like you said, I talk to people about it all the time. I am an open book about it because the more, as I started opening up, I think I mentioned I had all these people coming to me and saying like, yeah, that happened to me too. Well, how did I not know this until I came to you and shared my story, right? So it's just not something we talk about. And I didn't want other people, especially my friends who maybe hadn't had kids yet or hadn't started trying yet. I wanted them to know up front what had happened, because if it happened to them, I didn't want them to feel alone and like no one understood like I felt. And since then I've had a handful of friends who have come to me. One in particular, she had 3 miscarriages in a row. She ended up successfully going through IVF and now her son's like 9 months old, but I was actually pregnant with my second and she had called me to have coffee. And I just felt like that's what she was going to tell me. I didn't know that she had had all these miscarriages. I didn't know she was going through this and she didn't know I was pregnant with my second. And so I texted her beforehand. I was like, I think I'm just more aware. Like, I think a lot of people would have been like, oh, I'll surprise her and I'll be pregnant and she'll see my bump. And I just like knew that she had something to talk to me about and that she knew that this had happened to me and she needed someone to lean on. So I texted her beforehand and I was like, I want you to know I'm 18 weeks pregnant. We haven't talked in a while. I feel like you want to tell me something and I don't want you to have to process that feeling of me telling you I'm pregnant or seeing me pregnant in person live in front of me. I want you to know this ahead of time. I want you to be able to like process that because I didn't think she was similar to me. Like, I didn't think she was going to be excited for me. And I understood that. And so, she really leaned on me through all of that because she knew I got it. And I think that I just really like want people to know that it happens so often and so many people get it, but just no one talks about it. And that is so frustrating to me. And it's something that's why I'm so like upfront about it and open about it, because I don't want people to feel alone. Right.
What would you tell women out there now? Well, wait, before you answer that, I've got another question before we jump into just wisdom that you would impart on women now who are dealing with this or may in the future. What was your second pregnancy like?
It was shockingly it's a little tricky because at the beginning I was like, this is great. I don't have all this anxiety. I can relax a little bit. I think part of it was I was chasing a toddler around. So I didn't have as much time to be like consumed with my thoughts, and that time didn't exist. So the first, trying to think, 6 months probably were good, comparatively speaking. And then COVID hit. So I was 6 or 7 months pregnant in March of 2020. And that was such an uncertain time, obviously, for all of us, that it really like ramped things back up again.
Oh my God. I was just going to say, Kristen, with your anxiety and COVID and pregnancy, good Lord.
I was in the garage. We'll never forget this. And Matt coming out and being like, which is worse for you right now? I was in the garage. I remember our groceries. And we were all kind of doing this, but it was just, I think, at another level for me. And I remember like in the garage, gloves on, all our groceries, Lysol wipes, like wiping down our groceries. It was March. It was freezing out. So like I'm in the garage and the door's only cracked a little bit. And he came out and he's like, Kristen, you're like breathing in bleach. He's like, do you think that this is worse for you than any potential, like this virus that nobody can really understand? Like, I think the odds of the bleach being a problem are much, much higher than like COVID being a problem. And it all like ramped back up again. Those last couple months were really hard, I had to go to all my doctor's appointments alone, like going into ultrasounds with like winter gloves on that I was like and again, I think everyone was and that was a tricky time for me. I remember like calling my therapist. I hadn't talked to her in a while and I called her and I was like, this is so different because at the time, it wasn't illogical. I was back in like is this logical worry or not? And it didn't like, I don't think anyone would have agreed. Like it wasn't illogical. Nobody knew what was going on. Everyone was terrified. And so it was a new feeling of anxiety for me because I was worrying about something that was very real and very like real for everyone. And I just think, I was 7, 8, then 9 months pregnant. And it was just so much more concerning for me because of the pregnancy. And then it started to come out like maybe I was higher risk because of the pregnancy, but there was no way to address it at that point. So I think it was better at the beginning. And then that sort of threw it for a loop, which I think is not surprising probably.
No, I'm just sitting here going, Jesus, with these 2 pregnancies.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was a lot of like, we saw our neighbors across the street and I would come back inside and be looking out the window and trying to remember, because it was the 6 feet thing, right? You need to be 6 feet apart. Looking out the window, trying to be like, okay, I was standing here and she was standing there. And that's like 8 feet apart. Do we think that was far enough apart? I was like going outside with a measuring tape to like see how far apart we were. Like it definitely like kicked up a bit with the COVID thing.
Yeah. And I just keep going back to the idea of what grief does to us, and it can make us feel insane. And those residual effects, that's what I think a lot of people don't understand are the trauma of deep grief and how that ripple effect in our world. I will never be the same since my brother's death. Never. In so many different ways, some really beautiful, great ways, and other ways where, when I call it my neuroses, where it starts kicking in. But I love how you're illuminating that it is no different with this baby that you carried for 7 weeks, or for me who knew my brother for 43 years. Those feelings are the same. It is a universal feeling, except that mine, everybody knew. It felt like such a silent, torturous experience. And so, which leads into the question that I was getting to earlier. In hindsight, or where you are now, what can you offer other women that may be going through this exact same experience right now? What wisdom would you pass on to them?
I think in like the depth of it, I was just so worried that it was and in some cases it is indicative of something bigger, of course. But I think in a lot of cases when 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a miscarriage, it doesn't really mean a lot. Like from like a biological perspective, it just happens sometimes and it's nothing that you did. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen again. And I think that's the piece that was hard for me. Like it's nothing that I did and it doesn't mean it's going to happen again. I was convinced that it was going to happen again, that the worst was going to happen. And it didn't. And it didn't because there's really just no rhyme or reason sometimes to why these things happen. Again, sometimes there is a rhyme or reason. Sometimes there are other biological things happening and people have a difficult time and they need outside help. And all of those things are obviously very real, but a lot of times it's just a fluke. It's just biology, and your body in a lot of ways was probably, and this was another good thing that my therapist like helped me realize and work through. My body was doing what it was supposed to do. My body recognized that pregnancy, for whatever reason, we will never know, was not viable and wasn't right in whatever way. And my body was doing what it was supposed to do. And it wasn't the mindset of my body didn't do what it was supposed to do, because it did. And that was what I think was so big for me. Like it wasn't nothing was wrong. My body did what it was made to do, which was to carry a pregnancy that was viable. And it knew that wasn't that pregnancy. And so it did what it needed to. And that like frame of thinking was very helpful for me. And also So it is so common, and we don't talk about it enough that people know how common it is. I'm a big proponent of like, it's maternal mental health awareness. It's like a website and a movement. They have like Maternal Mental Health Week and, posting on social media to just try to raise awareness, because I didn't know it was 1 in 4 pregnancies until it happened to me. And I really started getting involved. And I think people just feel alone and like they must be the only one going through this because nobody talks about it. And that's just so not true. It's so not true.
You said that you started to see a therapist. Was that as a result of the loss of the baby that you started to see somebody?
No, I've been in and out of therapy since I was a teenager. Again, like some OCD tendencies as a teenager, definitely like generalized anxiety disorder. I've gone through phases where I haven't seen anyone, but I had started to see someone kind of prior to all of this, and she followed me through this. And again,
was seeing your therapist, was that helpful?
It was, again, she helped me just frame things and think of things in a different way, in a way that I was, especially at this point, I was just so deep in it. The people around me were not trained therapists, obviously. And again, the people that love me, well-intentioned, but like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not going to happen again. Don't worry about it. Like that wasn't helpful. I needed someone to help reframe my brain and think in ways of exactly what I just shared. Your body was doing what it was supposed to. Like someone who isn't trained to do these kinds of things probably isn't going to come up with that on their own. And so she just was able to like offer different perspective on a lot of it that helped reframe my thought processes around it. Yeah.
One more quick question before I get to my self-love. We talk about platitudes and things that are not helpful when somebody we love dies. So many things I could spend a whole podcast talking about them. One of my least favorites is they're with the angels now. I believe in angels and I love angels, but I would want my brother here with me. I don't really necessarily want him with the angels. So what would have been helpful? Sometimes it's people saying nothing at all, right? Like I always say that, sometimes we don't have to do anything but be in the space or listen. That's it. We just have to listen. We don't have to do or say anything but actually be present. Thinking that, can you think of anything that was actually helpful? Like that somebody said, that somebody did, anything at all that was actually comforting during that time?
It's interesting that you say that, because I am a big proponent of always asking. I even do it with my kids now. Like my biggest question is, do you want me to help you try and solve this problem, or you just want me to listen? Because I think that I felt like I was a broken record. I was saying the same thing over and over again, and that no one wanted to listen to me anymore. No one like in my brain, it's like, no one wants to listen to you whine anymore, Kristen, like stop. And I think that honestly would have been huge and that's why therapy I think was so helpful, because it was my time every week that whether I was paying her or not, but that she like had to listen. And I was just able to like talk and she had to listen, because I think that everyone jumped immediately to trying to say the things that they thought were going to help solve it for me or like make me think about it differently, but none of them really did. And I think having just someone to be there and listen. And that's what Matt does for me a lot. He went through a lot of this with me, and he definitely gets to a point. And it was hard for me because I knew he got to a point that the more that I harped on, the more that I like spiraled in front of him and to him, it was started negatively affecting his mental health, right? Like he tries not to like get pulled in with me, but it's hard when you're living with someone and that's what they're doing all day, every day. But he's definitely like my listener. And I do very much appreciate that, as opposed to like let me try and solve this for you. Like in this moment, I don't need you to solve it for me. Nothing is really going to solve it for me. I just need you to listen to me talk.
And I asked that very same question to friends and my husband. I love that. Do you need me to solve this? Or not even solve? Do you want advice, recommendation, or would you just like me to listen? It is a beautiful question to ask anybody in your life when they come to you with anything, because lots of times, or I will say that to people, I don't need you to fix this. I just need to talk about this for a few minutes. Yeah. And it's very helpful because the person on the other end, sometimes we're not sure what we're supposed to be doing with whatever somebody is sharing, right? Okay, we are coming to the top of the hour. So I have my last question. What does self-love look like for you now? What does it mean to you?
I think now I'm really in it. I have an almost 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. I think it is giving myself the grace to put myself first sometimes. I think that I'm definitely not the only one in my position who does this, but it's always about everybody else. It's always from everything from, making sure that I'm packing the snacks that I know they're not going to whine about not liking to, solving the big things. Like I didn't get, yesterday I didn't get put in school class with my friends. Right. So there's like this whole gamut of always taking care of everyone else. Right now, for me, it's the grace to say to myself, like, you can take 30 minutes to do what you need to do to improve your well-being. A lot of times right now, that's exercise. I've been leaning really hard into it lately. Like it makes me feel so much better. It clears my mind. So there's just so many positives about it. And it is really hard for me not to feel guilty about taking that time, especially on weekends when the kids are home. And that means that Matt's with them by himself for that time. And he is so supportive, but I still feel guilty. So it's about like giving myself the grace to take the time I need to do what I need to do for my well-being, whatever that is in that moment. It's hard to let go of that guilt. It's hard to let go of the guilt of like, well, I should be doing X and instead I'm doing this thing for me, and realizing and reframing and saying like, doing this thing for me is the most important thing in this moment. Everyone else can wait. It's only 30 minutes or whatever it is.
It's amazing. It doesn't even matter how many times we hear the different analogies. Oh, you got to put your own mask on, on a plane, you got to put your oxygen mask on first before you can help anyone else. But I think that oftentimes it's so easy to wear ourselves down to the bone until we're forced to take time off because we get sick, right? I mean, you either get, whether it's mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, etc. But one day I have a little niece and nephew, and my sister-in-law is a doctor, an anesthesiologist, and so she works long hours. And I just never forget, I was over there one day and it was a holiday, and I think it might have been Easter. I don't really remember. It doesn't even matter. Totally irrelevant. But we were cooking in the kitchen, and she's like, "I'm going to go run for 45 minutes," and I can't remember what happened. If somebody asked her a question or it was a mother or whatever, she goes, "I can go take 45 minutes. And it was this, I was like, yes, you can go take 45 minutes.
Go, girl.
It's like, it doesn't even matter if like you're going to have a house full of people in an hour and a half. You go take it sounds so ridiculous. 45 minutes, 45 minutes. What is that? You said a half an hour. And it's what self-care looks like on a day-to-day basis is so important for our mental and physical well-being. And I say this all the time, especially when you're grieving. When you're grieving, it is the time in our life when we take care of ourselves the least. We don't feel like doing anything. We don't want to get out of bed. And, and so people hear me say this all the time, do the basics, sleep, drink water, eat food, and get outside, get exercise of some kind. Okay. Do you have an Instagram channel if there are women that hear this and they would like to get in touch with you, if that's an open possibility for you? Is there a channel they can find you?
Yeah, definitely. I think I sent you my Instagram handle. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
That's okay. We'll have it in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah, I have a lot of posts. I don't know if I did it this year, but I also, like I said, I do like the social media campaigns for Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, which is just, they run a campaign every year. So for 5 days, you post every day just about, different things to like raise awareness about maternal mental health. So all those posts are there too.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end?
Just thank you. This was awesome.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And again, listeners, thank you for tuning in. And I hope this brought somebody out there some comfort. And love you guys. And we'll see you here next week. Bye for now.